Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Around the Desk from Decision Desk HQ. I'm Drew McCoy. We are here today to talk about yesterday's very interesting, very exciting UK general election, joined by Scott Tranter, Dr. Alexander Podcool, and from our friends over at leantossup.ca, Evan Scrimshaw and Robert Martin. Good afternoon, everyone. How you guys doing after a quick turnaround from a long night last night?
Pretty good.
Doing well.
All right,
Is this
good.
a new stream, or are we still here from last night?
Sort of feels like
bottom
one long
account's still
continuous
here.
dream. So why don't we dive right into this? Last night election recap. Why don't we start off with the basics of how this worked? Scott, you want to walk us through the number of seats everybody won and the changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, conservatives. It's as some people can call it the blue wave. 365 seats. I mean, the exits had them at 368, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So yay for exits. I think we'll be talking about that a little later. Labor, 42 seats down, 203. Scottish National Party, despite them calling for a referendum this morning because they won, they did lose. They did not hit their projected seats. They were plus 13, which is good. The Lib Dems just completely collapsed.
And by projected seat, you mean the exit poll?
I'm sorry, exit poll seats.
Yeah.
That's correct. If you go up to the map, it's blue. So blue is Conservative Party, yellow is Scottish National Party. It reminds me of those maps after 2016 where, the county level color maps where they just show land mass. And that's what it is. The red happens to be right around cities, and that's where Labor, kind of held on. I mean, I think the take on this, and it'd be interesting what you think, Podcool, and we'll get into the lean toss-up guys in a second, is, no one can say, we'll talk about turnout, no one can say they didn't know what they were voting for here. And this is pretty decisive. And, the map, I think, is a good undertone of that. And probably that, Scotland really wants out of the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing just on the overall results before we get to the turnout is we'll get more kind of regional data and information from Rob and Evan when we turn to them. But just looking at each, if we look at England, Scotland, and Wales, there was about almost a uniform 8-point drop from Labour. Obviously, it depends who's running in each of these seats, and there are different things to consider. Like in Scotland, we have SNP, and so there are things to different considerations. But there was uniform 8 percentage point drop in Labour from the 2017 general election across the board. So even this morning, if people are trying to make sense of what happened to Labour, yes, there are certain different pockets that you could point to, and we're going to get to that. But I just think the overall just drop in vote share is something that we want to watch. But another point, if we could look at the turnout, just because we had some people asking last night, how did turnout stack up? We had an overall turnout of around 67% of those who are registered to vote. That's pretty consistent. If we look in 2017, that's about a 2 percentage point drop from 2017, about a 1 percentage point increase from 2015. So overall, the United Kingdom turnout has remained fairly consistent. And when we break it out by region in the bottom of the chart, we see pretty much all the countries, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, are pretty much at about the same rate. It looks like there was a pretty even slope in a decrease since 2017 for England, Wales, Northern Ireland, maybe Northern Ireland a little bit steeper. The only place where we did see an improvement in the vote share from 2017 was actually in Scotland.
So, I mean, take a look at that. I mean, that's the fascinating thing to me is there is I should know this, is voting compulsory in the UK?
No.
It is not. So, 2/3 of the people are eligible to vote, roughly vote every time, and as much as this election was hype, it still didn't even hit the high water mark of 2017. I mean, these things are highly contested, and 1/3 of the people are like, fuck it, I'm gonna go home and play some Xbox. I'm not gonna vote, which I can appreciate that mentality. But the the Scotland vote did have their uptick, especially over 2017, and I think that was their big, we're done, we're out, right? I mean, and the turnout tells that story. Does anyone disagree with that?
Well, it's a small turnout. It's a small shift in turnout.
Well, small shift in turnout. It's not as big as it was in 15, but I mean, small shift is enough to read into it. I guess,
Sure.
I don't know. Is it not statistically significant? I guess it.
Well, there's no statistical test because it happened.
Right. But I meant in terms of correlation with everything else. I don't know. Probably not. There's probably not enough movement between all the others.
Yeah, and another thing we want to look at going forward is looking at the constituency level turnouts and looking at those numbers. In terms of the overall number, I don't think we want to over extrapolate, well, how did Scotland do in the overall turnout? But I think when we break that out, we may find, and we haven't yet done that because we're still streaming from last night. But the next step, I think, is looking at where we saw surges in turnout relative to 2017 and to see how correlated that is with different flips towards the S&P.
Yeah. I mean, we could have over-extrapolated a little bit. I'd be curious, Drew, what are your thoughts on this turnout stuff?
It's weird as an American looking at it because this is a 6-week process, and obviously there's a run up to it, and people kind of know it's coming. But the campaigns are really incredibly short compared to America, and to see the turnout, it's I don't know. I would have thought it would have been higher, but it certainly was decisive. I don't think anybody can complain about that. And like you said, people knew who they were voting for, and that's going to be the interesting post-mortem, right? Were they just voting against Jeremy Corbyn, or was this the second Brexit referendum and it was decisively decided for the Conservatives? One thing I think it's going to be hard to say, well, it's just Corbyn. Corbyn was the leader in 2017 when they picked up seats. And it's, not like there was a bunch that just came out about it. He is who he is. He's a well-known figure. He's been on the scene a long time. I think, obviously, Johnson really sort of captured the moves, like, just get it done. Yeah, it seems like there was a sense of, we have to make a decision here, and it was pretty decisively done.
I'm curious. What do our friends in Canada? I'm sorry. What do our friends in Canada think about all this?
So two things. One, quickly on the Scotland point, I think the turnout increase and the fact that the S&P vote went up 8 points is very good evidence for the argument that, Scott, you're making about they are being fed. Scotland is fed up. They do want to get out, and I mean, you're seeing that from the Scottish government trying to force a referendum through. Basically, right now, they did that this morning. So I think you're right about that, and I think the turnout is part of the evidence, but it's not the only evidence piece. But I mean, Labour lost a bunch of working class seats that they tried to win last time, that they held on to last time, that the Conservatives tried to win last time, and they didn't. Having a born-again Leaver who voted to remain and campaigned for remain in Theresa May as your leader wasn't as effective as having a true Brexiteer leading the country. Boris Johnson led the Leave campaign. He's now Prime Minister of the country. The Tory party won those seats. I think it's that simple.
What's your take, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, again, the turnout was a little lower, not particularly lower. I mean, it was only 2%. I think from 2016 from 2012 to 2016 in the U.S., there's basically the same turnout. For that kind of turnout for 69 to 67, that's pretty much the same. I mean, again, I suspect that's caused by less Labour voters turning out for Jeremy Corbyn, probably particularly in the North, where a lot of former Labour voters came out to vote for the Conservatives in the North. I suspect some of them just said, I can't bring myself to vote for Boris. I'm just going to stay home. I think that's really where you're seeing the change in turnout. I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it's necessarily indicative of much other than the fact that just Jeremy Corbyn really didn't appeal to many people. Boris Johnson also, a lot of people hated him, but a lot of people viewed him as a means to get the Brexit deal. I think it's very similar to kind of the U.S. 2016, where a lot of people had very negative opinions of both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
Gotcha. Well, moving on to the models and polling, just to kind of kick this section off, the final constituency was called this morning, and we're going to talk about model performance, but simply the exits, which I find it interesting. Like, if you were reading everyone from The Economist to Sky to the YouGov model that came out, the night before the election, everyone was slightly hedging their bets. I mean, I'll never forget that we quoted on the website the YouGov model was like, there's a chance that there's a hung parliament. In other words, everyone wanted to put their marker down just in case everything was off, that they were there. And when the exits came out, everyone was shocked, but all the commentary and everything was like, well, they're exits, who knows? Horrible hot takes about Brexit in 2016 and all that kind of stuff. But I think, and we're going to ask this question around real quick, do you think the exits were good? My answer is yes, and here's the data. What do you think, Podcool?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it was not a historically bad exit poll because it has performed worse. We're talking on Labor. There was a shift of 12 seats from exit to actual. Missed SNP by 7, and so there are some areas where you could make I think good arguments about where it was off and it could be improved quite a bit, but I think that's sort of within a standard margin of error that we would assume here.
Gotcha. What do you think, Drew?
I mean, it told the story. That's really what counts. It's not necessarily going to be seat by seat and predictive of an individual constituency, but the general outlines of what the election turned out to be, other than a bit of a miss in Scotland with the SNP. It told the story at the beginning of the night, and it was just a long wait to get there. But we kind of knew where we were going as soon as this came out, and it bore out what the prediction was.
As a lead into the lean toss-up modeling and modeling here, what do you guys think of the exit polls?
The exit poll was an unmitigated success. It predicted a Tory majority of 86 seats. It's a Tory majority of 80. That's a win.
Yeah, you can't ask for an exit poll bigger than this. I mean, again, if you go back and watch previous UK elections on YouTube, again, there's so much talk of people saying, oh, the exit could be wrong. We're not seeing what the exit's seeing. Again, the exit poll is always within, you get a range of like plus minus 10. Here it was on the Conservatives, it was plus minus 3. And kind of an interesting point you're looking at it there. If you were just looking at those top line exit poll and you saw that Labour did better and SNP did worse, you would think that basically Labour won a bunch of seats in Scotland from the SNP, but that's not actually what happened. In actuality, the Conservatives won seats from the SNP. And I'm assuming, I mean, I don't actually have exactly what the exit poll said in terms of seat by seat, but what I'm guessing is that the exit poll was actually worse for Labour in the North than it actually turned out to be. I think they had the Conservatives winning more seats in the North than they actually did win. So actually Labour basically pulled seats back from the Conservatives, but then the Conservatives pulled those and then a little bit less of those back from the SNP.
Gotcha. Moving on to the next slide. Talk to us a little bit about your guys' model and its performance.
So we predicted the Tories would have a majority of 60. We thought they were going to win 355 seats. They won 365. We had a 71.8% chance of a Tory majority government. Our sort of the central prediction was a Tory majority. And we got 94.6% of individual constituencies correct.
Yeah, you to be honest, in terms of a forecast, you can't do much better than that, to be honest. I mean, again, bit of a polling miss in the North. Conservatives did slightly better than expected in the North. And in Scotland, again, there was a polling miss going the other way. So the Conservatives lost seats in Scotland that we thought they would have. But other than that, I mean, we were pretty much bang on in terms of the margins. It's pretty crazy, exactly. Like in terms of some of the regions, like we called every seat in the East and every seat in the West Midlands correctly. And then, I mean, one miss in the East Midlands, and then handful in Wales, couple in London, I think one in the Southeast, and then like 2 in the Southwest. So like, again, like just extreme, like very accurate into top line projections and even down to individual seat constituencies. It was very accurate.
This is a good thing. We kind of talked about it in the turnout in the recap section. What do you guys think happened in Scotland?
I think people who said they were going to vote for the Scottish Lib Dems, Scottish Labour, and the Scottish Tories, Remainers. I think some of them voted for the SNP because they were the most acceptable pro-Remain tactical vote, and I think some of it is that fear of a Boris Johnson government means that there are now people who might not have wanted Scotland to leave the UK 5 years ago, who are now like, oh, it's now a conservative country out of the EU. I think independence is now a more viable option than it was before. So I think it's a combination of those two things.
Yeah, and that was actually kind of an interesting point with turnout. When you went back to that turnout graph, turnout in Scotland in 2015 went up from 10 to 15, and then it went down in 17. So for people remembering back at home, in Scotland, the SNP had their best ever election in 2015. They won pretty much every seat in Scotland. And then it fell again, and turnout fell to 2017, and then that's when the SNP took a step back. That's when the Conservatives did well in Scotland. And then again, we saw an uptick tonight, and that's when the SNP did better again. So I think those are correlated. Like, you cannot dismiss that those are in some way correlated, at least. It would suggest that there is basically a kind of undercurrent of nationalism in Scotland, where a lot of people, I think they feel isolated from the rest of Great Britain. And again, Scotland massively voted to remain. They wanted to remain in the European Union. And I think if you're sitting there and you're a Scottish Remainer, I think you're kind of saying, well, I mean, I could vote for Lib Dems. Maybe they're the best chance in a seat. Or I could vote for Labour. Maybe they're the best chance. But if I really want to stop the Conservative, it's just simple. Just vote for the SNP. They're the strongest party. Maybe I'll just go vote for them. And that's the thing. And I think it was kind of just the simplest, the easiest choice, right? It's just like, okay, well, the SNP could probably take the Conservatives down here. Let's just vote for them. I think we're seeing some tactical voting. And I think we're seeing a resurgence of Scottish nationalism. And I think we're going to eventually see a very strong push in the coming weeks and months for Scottish independence.
Well, I believe the news was this morning that the Scottish National Party did call for a referendum vote coming in 2020. I don't know all the mechanics and how that's going to work.
There's a legal battle that's going to have to take place over this, and
yeah.
Don't want to bore you guys because it's entirely possible Boris Johnson will just sort of take a pass on actually fighting it, because it would definitely be in his political interest if all those SNP, Scottish Labour, and Scottish Lib Dems were to just maybe float off. His majority would go from 80 to substantially higher than 80 if he did that. So we'll see the exact mechanics, but it's hard to argue that there's not a mandate for this when the SNP vote goes up 8 points overnight.
The other thing is that, and I was talking to Evan about this last night. Evan did the exact math. We were talking later on Skype, but if Scotland was to leave the European Union, the UK, you could functionally cut off Labour and the Liberal Democrats from ever winning government, because that's like 59 seats, assuming the SNP wins 50 seats. Those are 50 seats you need to get a majority, right? If those seats are gone, then suddenly Labour is forced to have to win back those working class seats in the north. And at that point, there's just not enough Remain seats in the UK. I mean, the SNP in Scotland, basically, when you look at the seats that voted Remain, I believe it was 420 some odd seats voted to leave the European Union, and then the rest voted to remain. Is only like about 200 or so voted to remain. You now just sliced 50 off that. Now
that's a great point. That's a great point, though. That sort of gets us to the next thing we want to talk about here.
Go forward? But before we do that, I know we've got a lot of listeners. We've been told that this is good form, that we remind you guys, please either follow us on YouTube so you get alerted when we do this stuff. And even if you don't watch it live, we clip it up and you can, hear us mention Nickelback and me drop F-bombs. Or follow us on Twitch so that you can kind of get those updates as we do this. The last couple months we've been doing this. It's been a way for us to practice before we get into what we like to call the Super Bowl of politics, a presidential primary, where we're going to be doing this pretty much every primary night next year, and then obviously on election night as we get all the results. We're gearing up on our end. We've got, Decision Desk has been recruiting on the ground reporters so we can have the fastest results in New Hampshire. We're going to have it in the caucuses. We're still going to do what we're going to do, but we're going to be broadcasting tonight. So be sure to follow us on YouTube or follow us on Twitch going forward. With that, what does this mean going forward? I'd like to kind of keep this short so we can get some nice sound bites out of this. Drew, what's your takeaway of what this is going forward?
I think we're going to look back on last night in the coming years as a real turning point, for good or ill, depending on your perspective or how it comes out. Boris Johnson is likely to be a very consequential prime minister. We're talking about the UK leaving the EU, pretty big thing right in and of itself, and also a really good chance that in a few years, Scotland will not be part of the UK. This country could look very different at the end of his premiership than it does the day it starts.
It's a good point. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to understate exactly how big of a change we saw last night. I mean, the reason why a lot of people thought we were heading towards a hung parliament was because they had been clinging on to priors that Labour can't lose a seat, like Redcar or Bolsover or Basildon or even Halifax. And seats like those, they're all, like, so many of them are gone. And it's even worse, too, because there's so many more. There's another whole level of seats. You look at, there's other seats, like Doncaster North with Ed Miliband. That's a 2,000 seat majority.
So losing all these seats, what does it mean? What's the succinct analysis?
It means basically Boris Johnson broke through the red wall, and there's still more for him to break through. It's like with Donald Trump, he broke through the blue wall in 2016. Imagine if there was another Ohio and another Pennsylvania and then like another Wisconsin that he could break through in 2020 that he just didn't win. Like, imagine if there was another 2 or 3 Minnesotas left, and that's what we're looking at in the North. And it's like, this is a redrawing of the political map, and it's not even done yet.
So you think, yes or no, you think the next time they have elections, the Conservatives, I mean, a lot can happen in politics, but the Conservatives could gain more seats?
In the North, yes.
Okay.
They'll lose some in the South, but they'll gain more in the North.
Gotcha. Evan, what's your take?
It's a disunited kingdom. The Tories have won England. Labour still wins Wales, but not by as much as they usually do. Scotland is gone for unionist parties at this point. And Northern Ireland, there are serious questions about the potential unification of Ireland. And the United Kingdom is looking a lot more disunited this morning than it did this time yesterday.
Do you agree with Robert that the Conservatives could, I mean, there's still room for them to win some more seats next time around?
There's at least 15 on the board. I could see them winning in 2023 or 2024, yeah.
Gotcha. Podcool, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious to see some research that comes out of this election, just to really parse out what were some of the main causes in voters' minds about this. Was this truly an anti-Corbyn race, or was this a Brexit election? And I think, as of right now, back of the envelope, you could argue both ways. I'm pretty convinced by just the relationship of Brexit vote with the swing in the Conservative vote share from 2017. Those are pretty highly correlated, but I don't want to commit any ecological fallacies. So I'm curious to just see kind of what some of the explanations come out.
What do you got, trying to play 29-point word on Words with Friends, ecological fallacies? I mean, the interesting thing here to me is, look, both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn had sub 50% approval ratings, and that felt a lot like October 2016 in America. And at the end of the day, they just thought Jeremy Corbyn was that much worse, which was funny to me because this was billed as a, do you want to remain or leave? And instead you're running on personalities. And Boris Johnson is a personality and Corbyn is just that much more of a personality. And everyone was just like, fuck it, I hate you all, but I'm going to take Boris. And I think that's the takeaway. I mean, you had a graph up last night, Podcool, about, the correlation with Brexit and where some of these parties are going. The British seem to tactically vote more, and by tactically vote, they seem very more nuanced in who they're going to vote for, and they seem to put a lot more into it than we do in the U.S. And so I think, last night, despite it being the turnout what it was, it's not necessarily, I mean, they put some thought into this.
Yeah,
that actually brings up something that I wanted to ask you guys about, is what happens when you look at, first of all, the Lib Dems had a terrible night, but where are the seats where they split the vote with the Labour candidate that they might have been able to capture? And also Conservatives lost a couple of seats because the Brexit Party was still on the ballot. So there are some of those seats where that the environment may change, and those more minor parties may fall to the wayside and shuffle the deck a little bit.
What do you think, Podcool? Or you were saying before?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think as much as we want to focus on some of these individual seats, and I think Drew's right to point out some of these, because it all depends on who's on the ballot in these constituencies, and I think everybody's going to be taking a closer look as to where did the Brexit Party play spoiler, what's going on with the Lib Dems all over the place. But all I was going to say is just if we just take a step up from those idiosyncrasies, it was just a consistent loss of labor. And as much as we want to tell a regional story here, just everywhere, it was just like a linear 8-point shift down, pretty much in all of the constituencies when we average it out. And so I'm just convinced that it was really an anti-labor story across the map. As much as I want to
Anti-labor or anti-Corbyn?
Well, there's really no way for me to parse that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what's your gut tell you?
I mean, my gut tells me it's anti-Corbyn.
Okay.
But it was just overall, there was just this overall...
Because that's what the narrative's going to be.
Yeah.
I don't know what the data will say, but the narrative's it's Corbyn.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But why wasn't he dragged 2 years ago?
Well, I'd like to kind of throw something in about that too, because basically, if you look at a lot of people online on Twitter, they're all saying that, oh, we kept hearing about Corbyn when we talked to voters. And the thing is, I think the thing is, it's going to be, oh, it was all Corbyn's fault. He was too left wing. But at the same time, like Brexit was right there. I think you could basically make the correlation that basically people hated Corbyn's position on Brexit, and therefore they also hated Jeremy Corbyn, right? Leavers hated Jeremy Corbyn because he wanted a second referendum, and Remainers hated Jeremy Corbyn because he wanted a second referendum and he wanted Leave to be on the ballot, and he wanted like a different Brexit deal. So I think you can make the argument that both sides hated him because of Brexit. I mean, there's other reasons too. There's also anti-Semitism and other scandals that he had. But again, I think there's a very strong argument that Brexiters particularly hated him because of his stance on a Brexit deal and a second referendum.
Gotcha. Closing question for everyone. Scottish National Party, is there going to be a Scottish referendum, and are they going to be part of the UK in 2021? Yes or no? So it's two questions. Is there going to be a referendum, and are they going to be part of the UK? What do you think, Evan?
They're gonna hold a referendum. They're gonna win the referendum, and 2021 will be the transition year while they get all their affairs in order to leave.
Gotcha. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, agree. I think we'll be back here on another UK election night in a year. We'll have a Scottish independence referendum model, and the Leave vote will win it, and they will leave the United Kingdom.
What do you think, Podcool?
Yeah. Play the bagpipes. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I happen to agree with it. I'm probably the least knowledgeable about all of this, just because most of what I've read about this has been this morning. But I mean, these guys. I mean, just look at what the S&P ran on. Like, how could they not end up there? I'm gonna leave it to the only person I know who cares about soccer, Drew. What do you think?
Yeah, I think people are going to start
soccer,
watching
right?
Braveheart a lot more. They're gone.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's where we'll go ahead and end. Thanks for listening. We're going to cut this up and we'll put it on YouTube. But please remember to follow us on Twitch or follow us on YouTube. Keep an eye on the post. There'll probably be a couple more postmortems, and we'll be doing some more shows as we gear up for Iowa here in about 6 to 7 weeks. And you'll probably be hearing from the Lean Toss-Up guys more as well. Thanks for joining us, guys, and see you all next week.